Family's business. My father, Vincel, was in the drugstore. He started in the Sterling Drug when he was a sophomore in high school. You know, working behind the fountain and just doing whatever needed to be done. And he was there so long, and he started working in the pharmacy. You know, they let him oversee him, you know. And then you could get a practical druggist license. Didn't have to go to school. But you did have to take a test. And him and Clarence Davis went down and took the test, became practical druggist. You had to have a registered pharmacist on duty too, but you could get that license. And then I went to pharmacy school, became a registered pharmacist, and came back to work in that store. Well, he was a sophomore, so that made him about 15 or so, and that would have been in about late 20s, early 20s. I worked there when I was a junior, senior in high school. They had a work program. You could work it out in the afternoon, and if you had someplace to go, and I checked in the merchandise and marked prices on it and that kind of stuff. Like I said, I was born in Prairie Grove, born at Elizabeth Hospital. The families had a pharmacy in that hospital. They served the patients that were there in the hospital, and the doctors, Dr. Frank Rigall, and later Dr. Manning, other doctors, I can't remember their names, Cecil Rigall, but there was always somebody coming from Canada. There were trainees, I guess, you know, I don't know that they were interns, but they might have been a step above that, but they'd come down for a year or two or something, and we always had good medical facilities. Dr. Baggett, Dr. Mock, they were downtown in their office, and it was just a mecca for medical facilities. People came from four corners, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and we mailed out prescriptions. At that time, the mail came through town 4 times a day, 2 times each way. So you could get things out. If they called at noon, you could get it out on 3 o'clock mail, you know. And we literally mailed huge amounts of prescriptions every day. And these people that were from, like I say, Kansas and over in Oklahoma, over in Huntsville, in that area, they all came. Yeah, those people just called it in, but they had to come in to the doctor maybe once every 3 or 4 months, most of them. You know, there's a continuing thing, but they had to come in every so often, and they'd get new prescriptions and bring them in. And of course, they'd mark refills on them, and so we could send them in the mail then. I'm not so sure you can send some of that stuff in the mail anymore. All the doctors in town, for one thing, used for cough, congestion, Phenergan with codeine. I mean, everybody, Dr. Baggett, Dr. Hogg, Riggalls, everybody, Dr. Manning. And I remember one time, we bought this stuff direct from Wyeth. And my dad, we usually got it about 20 gallons at a time. And he tried to get a better price for 100 gallons one time, and they wouldn't do that. So we just get 20 gallons. We used to buy the main things was Amytal, and I don't guess that's even on the market anymore. It was a barbiturate. They used that kind of stuff instead of mecrobamate, Equinil, and that stuff. They wouldn't hardly use that. they used this stuff that was really habit forming. And we used to buy those in drums of 5,000, 10,000 at a time. And Eli Lilly, twice a year, would have a special promotion if you bought 100,000 assorted. And there was probably 6 or 8 different things we bought that way. Made it pretty cheap. It was a going business, no doubt about it. I graduated in '63, and the hospital closed. When Medicare came in, they couldn't meet the standards of size. Like the hallways had to be so big, and the rooms had to be so big, and they couldn't do that. So they couldn't take Medicare patients, and so the hospital part of it closed. And Lincoln didn't have a pharmacy at that time. They'd had 2, but they retired and gone out of business. And so I don't think they'd had a pharmacy for 2 or 3 years over there. And since we didn't have the hospital part anymore, well, we had too many hands and too many pharmacists, and so we decided to go to Lincoln. We figured somebody was going to go to Lincoln sometime. So we went and opened up over there. That was in '66. Well, the store here had several pharmacist owners. Clarence Davis, myself, my dad, and David Mast. And we had another, Blackie Wolverton worked there. He was a pharmacist. And Charlie Wolverton, who they bought the store from, that's who those owners bought the store from, was Charlie Wolverton. And so when we left, not when we opened the store in Lincoln, but 4 or 5 years later when my dad and I took over the Lincoln store, we bought out our part of the 2 stores. We traded to them for all of the Lincoln store. Okay, so then a couple of years later, well, Gary Davis got out of school, and he came back to Prairie Grove, and David Mast went to Missouri. He lived in Missouri, so went to work up there somewhere. The Wolvertons died, and so that's kind of the progression of it. My first job was at the IGA with Ronnie Stone and Guy Sparks, sacking groceries and carrying them out. And I wasn't very big. Sometimes I couldn't lift the boxes that they filled boxes full, you know, and 50-pound sack of flowers and stuff like that. But I made it do. That was my first job. Well, we had a big garden, and that was part of my big job was hoeing and, you know, helping plant and pick. And then when they got to where they didn't want to have so much garden, they just turned it into yard. And where the strawberry patch was sort of like this. Well, I had the push mower, no power equipment, just the push mower. My job to mow that strawberry patch. Oh my goodness. If you ever tried that, but just things like that. And we had some animals in our backyard, even though we lived in town. Had some hogs, and, you know. It was, but we had fun. We had fun. There was several kids about my age that lived within 2 blocks of where we lived, and every day was a ball game and just whatever, you know. But we had a good time. Tom McCoy, Slick McCoy, Bill Thurman, C.H. Miller, Wayne Hall, I can't remember now, Joe Geiger maybe, lived like I say, within 2 blocks of where I lived, and there was a big lot on the corner of the street, and that was our ball field, and so we had, that was every day. And I remember when we weren't playing on that field, we'd play at home, have ping pong balls for our balls, and used broomsticks for the bats. And we played like we were whatever our favorite major league team was, and we knew them by heart, and each batter you'd have to bat right-handed or left-handed, however that batter. But those ping pong balls, you could throw those, and they just went up there and went like that, and if you hit one on the house or over the house, that was a home run. And we spent many hours doing that. Yeah, we lived right downtown when I was born. We lived in a 2-story house right down on Main Street, and so I was, that's where I started in Prairie Grove. I remember we had a big coal pile. The old man owned the house. They put in gas, and he would not have gas. He was scared to death of gas, that it'd burn the place down, So we had coal. I remember that old dirty coal pile. I remember going to the movie, which was right across the street from where we lived. The house that we lived in was where John Everett built his law office first. That was where it was. And went to the movie, which is just direct across the street. Take a quarter, get a dime to get in, and a dime for a Coke, and a nickel for popcorn, and for a quarter you could spend a Saturday afternoon doing that. And I remember when my dad came back from the service, I think I was probably 5 or 6, and my mother was letting me walk across the highway there over to the movies. And boy, he couldn't believe that. He couldn't believe that they were letting me go by myself across the street to the movies. Well, of course, the Crescent was probably the main store in town, and the Florence Hills multi-faceted store. It was grocery store on one end and everything else in between, on the other. And of course, there was several filling stations in town, as I remember, maybe 5 or 6. And the bank and Hometown Grocery. Trades Day, the town was absolutely full. You spent your money in town, and you got so many tickets for so many dollars, and put them in a big barrel rolling thing, and Saturday afternoon they'd meet up at the park and start drawing those tickets out, and they gave graduated amounts of money. Wasn't much, but boy, people came to town on Trades Day. Really, any Saturday. Sometimes it was hard to get up and down the streets walking. It was that packed. Of course, people didn't go out of town to trade then. They didn't have any way. It was 12, 15 miles to Fayetteville was a long trip. And a lot of people didn't even have cars. My dad walked to work. We didn't have a car. He walked to work, about, 3 or 4 blocks, 5. Well, now, where everything is what I call a junk store, there were thriving businesses in those stores. Now, if you get rid of the antique store, we wouldn't have much. You get thinking about it. You'd have, downtown, you'd have one drugstore and the Crescent and parts store and the bank. And that'd be about it. And but then every place was filled. There weren't any empty buildings, as I remember. And but the times changed, and the highways got better, and the cars got better, and you could drive to Fayetteville easier, and so the dynamic just shifted. And if you didn't shift with it, well, you were in trouble. Well, we went to grade school at which the building's gone now. It's just up the street from Methodist Church on the right, and that's where we went to elementary, and then we went to the 3-story building just north of that when we got to the 8th grade. And 7th grade, I guess. We went there a year and a half. And then they built the high school up on the new property, and the gym was there, and Agri building, and then of course they tore the old 3-story. My mother always told me that 3-story building, she went to school there, and it was condemned when she went. And so it was it was still going when I went in 7th grade, 8th grade we moved over to the new building. But I can remember our parents would send us out after breakfast or let us go out, and we wouldn't see them again until lunch. And you'd hear them holler, and come in and eat and go back out, and you wouldn't see anything of them again until dinner time. But everybody did that, and everybody looked out, for everybody else's kid. And somebody was doing something wrong, they correct them just as if they were their own. So you didn't really worry about anything happening to people. The Huddlefield Park, as I remember, there was one building, and it was the open building. It didn't have walls, it just had the cornerstones. And the park was just grown up. It was just weeds, just literally weeds. Till I guess Fred McChristian or somebody got a hold of it and started cleaning it up and adding these buildings and things. That's the way I remember it. I remember when we were, this is in 1957, they was having the Labor Day thing. They didn't call it that, but at that time, but it was on Labor Day. And Orville Faubus was supposed to come and speak that day. Then the politicians, it was a political thing, instead of clothesline fair, too much of that. But the Boy Scouts were in charge of parking, and and it was just overwhelming on Sunday because Faubus was supposed to be there, and we couldn't handle it. A bunch of juniors in high school, sophomores. So the state police finally saw that wasn't going to work, and they took over, and we went swimming. That was in '57. Where Faubus was, of course, he was in Little Rock. That's when the big deal at Little Rock happened. That's when the feds took over down Little Rock. I remember we used to cook chicken out on the open pits, and till I think the health department made us quit doing that. But the Lions Club was in charge of that, and they'd start fires at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they let them burn down then, and we had big racks that we used to cook half chickens. And so that was probably after I came back up here that I remember that. So that would have been middle 60s. I do remember when they paved the main street through town. We lived in this 2-story house right down on Main Street, and I was just a baby. I mean, I said I remembered it. I see pictures of it, and I was in some of those pictures when they paved the main street. And then I remember when they paved the street in front of my mother and dad's house. They moved there in, oh golly, 50s, middle 50s, moved the house in, and the street wasn't paved. Of course, the street where I live on now wasn't paved when I moved into it in 1964. It was a new subdivision and the streets weren't paved, but soon thereafter, it was. The Colonial Courts was a big meeting place. And Ethel and Lloyd Jarish, they were from Wisconsin. I don't know how they ended up down here. But they stayed open till we got home from basketball games. Didn't make any difference where it was, how late it was. We could go up there, split an order of French fries and drink a Coke, and had a bumper pool game. We could do that. We could play cards. We could dance, whatever. And that was kind of the saving grace for the kids, in those days. Everything went through the courts.